We go to the best to break down college football betting lines each week. That's Steve Merrill from Pro Sports Info here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Like, comment down below, give us your selections and respond to what Steve has to say. And, of course, share the videos on social media and subscribe right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. All right, Steve, let's get right to it. We've got a matchup in the SEC with LSU and Auburn, somewhat off of their typical standards in regards to SEC and national prominence this year. And, of course, LSU, the national champion last year, is rebounding with a win against South Carolina in convincing fashion last week. Auburn coming off another controversial finish. They're a 3-2 team. They could be a 1-4 team. Auburn +3 at home on the Plains against LSU.
Yeah, of course, big news is LSU without their starting quarterback leg injury. They still put up 52 points last week. They've now scored 41 points or more in 3 straight games. This offense is really not missing a beat after losing Joe Burrow and company. What's been a lot weaker, though, this year, Mark, as you know, has been the defense. Other than holding Vanderbilt to 7 points, their first 3 games, they allowed 44 and 45 points in those other 2. They did give up 24 last week to South Carolina, but they played better defensively. And I do think this is an LSU team that will continue to improve as the season goes on. They obviously had to really, I don't want to say rebuild, but they had to reload this season. And it took them a while to get going defensively. We'll see if they've made that progress. Still, when you factor in opponents played this year, this has been a terrible LSU defense. They're giving up 7.2 yards per play against teams that average just 5.1. You bring in an Auburn team that's very mediocre offensively, but defensively they're getting up just 5.4 yards per play. So they're getting almost 2 yards per play less defensively, and we get them as an underdog here. This line opened pick'em. LSU now up to -3. My power ratings actually made it 1, so it's right in between the opener and the current line. So at pick'em, I think there was a little value with LSU, but now at that key number of +3 or more, I would lean towards Auburn as the defensive home dog.
Huge game in the Big 12. Oklahoma State is the hope for a college football playoff appearance as the lone undefeated team in the Big 12, although Kansas State officially ties them with the conference lead with no losses in conference. Texas needs to make a last stand. They've got 2 losses, so if they tag one on Oklahoma State and hope for an upset elsewhere, obviously they've got the tiebreaker, can get into a championship game situation. And Vegas obviously gives the Longhorns a fighting chance in this one, a little closer than I expected. Texas at Oklahoma State, Cowboys by 3.5.
Yeah, we talked about the Oklahoma State-Iowa State game here on the show last week, and that line was anywhere during the week. When we did the show, it was 3.5. On Saturday, it went down to 2.5. It closed at 3 in some spots. And lo and behold, Oklahoma State wins by exactly 3, that very key number like I just talked about in the LSU-Auburn game. And here again, Oklahoma State opened as a 3-point favorite this week. The money has come in on the Cowboys. They're now a 3.5-point favorite. I make the line 4.5, so I do think there's still some value with Oklahoma State, but I would have liked it a lot more at -3 or less. If it ticks back down to -3, which it very well might by this weekend, the value is with Oklahoma State. Substantial defensive edge in this game, allowing just 4.5 yards per play, only 12 points per game. Texas, meanwhile, allowing 32 points per game, almost 5 yards per play. You know, Oklahoma State's always been a good offensive team over the years. They've never been able to stop anybody. That's what's different about this edition. Oklahoma State has a legitimate defense this year, but this will be a close game. I would have liked Oklahoma State better if the line had stayed at -3 or less.
Then we've got what we expected to be the game of the year in the Big Ten. Ohio State traveling to Happy Valley to take on Penn State. Now, this Penn State edition, much different than what we anticipated this team to be a month ago or 6 weeks ago, with Micah Parsons, one of the best players on the defensive side of the nation, opting out. They're missing another fine linebacker in Jesse Luketa for the first half. Journey Brown, 200-plus yards in the Cotton Bowl. He was an emerging star. He's out. His backup, Noah Cain, a top-5 running back coming out of high school, out. Penn State team that obviously was devastated with the loss at Indiana in surprising fashion, despite dominating the game statistically, 36-35 final. The Buckeyes pretty much doing what we would have expected against Nebraska in a 35-point win. So Ohio State as a road dog by 12 at Penn State.
Yeah, you know, if you throw away the final scores last week, and if you were just to give me the box scores of the 2 games, you never would have thought Penn State was the team that allowed just 41 rushing yards, 1.6 yards per carry, and that Ohio State allowed 210, 5.8 yards per rush last week in that game. So, you know, you can make a case that the misleading results have given us some line value here, and I do think that's the case. This line opened 10.5. It's now 12. My power rankings actually only make Ohio State a 9-point favorite. So the line's gone even higher, even though I think the line was too high even at the opener. So there is some value with Penn State as a 12-point home dog here. As you mentioned, Mark, a very misleading loss last week against Indiana. Penn State outgained them over 200 and some yards. They had a 3-2 turnover deficit, though, that made the big difference. But still a substantial rushing edge. Penn State 250 yards on the ground, allowed, as I mentioned, only 41. So there's definitely some things that point to Penn State playing better this week. And then on top of that, we get some line value at plus 12.
Penn State's kicker missed 1 field goal last year. He missed 2 plus a lengthy one, 3 missed field goals from Penn State last week as well. All right, join us on Patreon. Steve will provide his off-the-radar lock of the week. It's always a great selection. So we get the 3 national games here. Jump on over to Patreon. You get my predictions. You get Steve's lock of the week, his betting advice there, as well as all the insider looks and so forth over on Patreon.